In the past, these so-called barbarian migrations were often seen as the catalyst for the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, as Edward Gibbon put it over 2 centuries ago. Whilst this perspective can still be found among modern scholars, the majority of experts today believe that these movements of non-Roman groups were just one of many reasons for the eventual collapse of the political institution that was the Western Roman Empire. In its place, a number of more or less successful successor kingdoms arose, led by those same barbarians who had previously moved into the empire, with or without the permission of its emperors. Almost all of these groups were seen as Germanic in the past, but recent scholarship has brought their often multi-ethnic composition to light, which also included non-Germanic elements. The exact ethnic composition of these groups is still difficult to determine using archaeological and historical evidence alone, however. That is in part why, in 2025, a team of experts around Leon Speidel attempted to retrace these migrations from a genetic perspective. In order to do so, the team first established a baseline of possible source populations, each composed solely of pre-migration period individuals. The established groups were the following: a British group consisting of a total of 11 samples dated to the Iron Age and the Roman period, and taken from individuals buried predominantly in eastern and northern Britain. A Central European group consisting of a total of 10 samples from Iron Age northeastern France, central Germany and eastern Austria. A Portuguese group consisting of 4 individuals from southern Portugal during the Roman period. An Italian group consisting of 10 individuals from central Italy, also during the Roman period. A Lithuanian group composed of 5 individuals from Iron Age eastern Lithuania. Several Eastern European groups composed of samples from Bronze and Iron Age northern and southeastern Poland, eastern Ukraine, Slovakia and Hungary, totaling 25 individuals. And finally, and most significantly for this study, an early Iron Age Scandinavian group consisting of a total of 10 individuals from southern and central Norway, as well as southeastern and central Sweden. Because the authors assumed that the Scandinavian group was the most likely to represent Germanic ancestry, they attempted to retrace the migrations of groups who carried admixture similar to these Iron Age Scandinavians to determine whether they left a genetic footprint along their journeys. Now, before we move on to the results of this study, let's take a closer look at the established groups. Unfortunately, this study, just like many other paleogenetic studies, suffers from the issue of relatively small sample sizes. The biggest of the established groups, the one supposedly representing Iron Age and Roman Britain, consists of only 11 individuals. Although Britain was not as densely populated as the more developed Mediterranean parts of Europe, it was probably still home to well over 1 million people of diverse cultural and ethnic backgrounds. Furthermore, the pre-Roman Iron Age and the subsequent Roman period in Britain lasted for about 1,200 years in total. And thirdly, the samples making up this group are taken only from northern and eastern Britain, meaning that other parts of the island are not represented. Given these issues, a sample size of 11 is probably not representative of the inhabitants of the island over such a long period of time. The same naturally goes for the other groups, which all suffer from similar issues. Another issue of the study, which the authors mentioned in the paper itself, is that key regions for the investigation of the movement of the barbarian tribes are missing. Let's take a look at a few of these tribes to determine where they originated and which locations are missing. The probably most important ones of these tribes were the Franks, the Angles, the Saxons, the Lombards, the Suevi, the Alemanni, the Bajuwari, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals. There were others, of course, but many of these groups feature prominently in these sources, and all of them left a lasting impact on Europe. Whilst the Franks probably originated on the Lower Rhine, the Angles and Saxons hailed from northern and northwestern Germany, and possibly southern Denmark. The Lombards apparently lived in their vicinity as well, along the banks of the Lower Elbe in northern Germany, where the ancestors of the Alemanni and the Bajuwari probably also came from. Both the Lombards and the Alemanni are classified as belonging to a group of Germanic tribes referred to as Suebi in the ancient sources. In fact, the Alemanni later on became synonymous with this more ancient name. During the migration period, however, a tribe known as simply the Suebi was located on the Middle Danube, in the direct vicinity of the Vandals with whom they crossed the Rhine in 406 AD. The Suebi probably developed from the Marcomanni or the Quadi, two tribes that feature prominently in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD and which are attested in the same area. Both of them were described as being part of the Suebi in our ancient sources. To the north of the Suebi lay the original homeland of the Goths, which are first recorded on the Baltic coast of modern northern Poland. Possibly as early as the 2nd century AD, they started to migrate towards the Black Sea and the lower Danube, however. Out of all of the locations mentioned, only the Gothic homeland of northern Poland is included in the study. The whole of northern Germany, which was the original homeland of the majority of these tribes, at least according to our historical and archaeological evidence, is not included in the data of this study. Particularly unfortunate is the absence of genetic data from the so-called Jastorf culture, roughly located in what is modern northeastern Germany, and which is often thought to have been the earliest manifestation of Germanic material culture. This argument is augmented by the fact that the development of Proto-Germanic is thought to have coincided with the development of the Jastorf culture around the middle of the 1st millennium BC. This absence is due to no fault of the study's authors, however. The people of the Jastorf culture almost exclusively practiced cremation, which makes it very difficult to extract usable DNA from their remains. The team around Speidel were well aware of this issue, which is why when they detected Scandinavian admixture outside of Scandinavia, they usually refer to it as Scandinavian related, assuming that it could have also been carried by people of the Jastorf culture or their descendants. That being said, in the absence of actual samples from the Jastorf culture or the succeeding Alp Germanic culture that developed from it, we simply don't know for sure what their genetic makeup really was, which should be kept in mind when examining the results of this and other similar studies. With all of these caveats out of the way, let's take a look at the results and put them into context. Based on the genetic groups the authors established, they observed two distinct waves of Scandinavian-related ancestry across Europe during the first half of the 1st millennium AD, which later either disappeared again or was relatively heavily admixed with other ancestry components and thus diluted. The earliest Scandinavian-related admixture the researchers found outside of Scandinavia was found in northern Poland's Wielbark culture, dated to the 1st 3 centuries AD. Wielbark individuals during this period displayed up to 100% of the Scandinavian admixture component, which is broadly in line with a 2023 study I've covered on the channel. That being said, according to the older study, which looked at more Wielbark samples than the present paper, Wielbark culture individuals plotted closer to modern Western Central European populations on average, such as modern Belgians, Dutch and Germans. According to a PCA plot I've made with publicly available G25 coordinates from 3 different Wielbark sites, the Wielbark culture of the 1st centuries AD was genetically quite diverse, overlapping to differing degrees with Baltic, Celtic and other northern European populations. That being said, according to my own QP-ADM ancestry models of 2 of these 3 sites, they probably did derive on average over 90% of their ancestry from Iron Age Denmark, with the rest possibly coming from southern Central Europe. According to the 2025 study at hand, by the 5th century AD, the Scandinavian-related admixture component among Wielbark individuals had decreased to about 75%. In contrast to the aforementioned 2023 study, the present paper didn't find any genetic continuity between the Wielbark culture and the medieval inhabitants of Poland, indicating that the population was replaced pretty much in its entirety by groups mainly composed of admixture from Iron Age Lithuania, Latin Slovakia, and Scythian-related ancestry from Hungary. Whilst the admixture from Lithuania makes sense in the context of the arrival of the Slavs, it is likely that ancestry associated with the Latin culture was already present in Poland during the Iron Age. The Iron Age Przeworsk culture, which dominated the southern half of Poland during this period, formed under strong influence from the Latin culture and showed many similarities to it. So it would be plausible that individuals belonging to this culture also carried Latin ancestry, not too dissimilar to that of Iron Age Slovakia. Unfortunately, I didn't have access to the right data to run QP-ADM models on Przeworsk individuals, but the PCA plot I've just showed also contains 2 individuals belonging to this culture, and one of them clusters very closely with Latin individuals from France and Czechia, as well as Hallstatt individuals from southwestern Germany, so a Celtic influence among the Przeworsk culture seems likely, although we should keep in mind that this is based on a single individual. In Roman Britain, evidence of Scandinavian-related ancestry has been detected in an individual identified as a potential gladiator or soldier, notably predating the Anglo-Saxon migrations. However, because this individual carried only about 25% of this genetic component, it is likely that only a single grandparent originated from Scandinavia or northern Central Europe. Furthermore, his status as either a slave, which gladiators were, or a soldier complicates any argument for a permanent Northern European presence in Britain at the time. Both groups represented highly mobile segments of the Roman population, moving across the empire by military or trade demands rather than settled migration. A permanent increase of Scandinavian-related admixture is observed in later centuries, but the authors noted a high degree of variation regarding this ancestry component across early medieval England, confirming that not all areas of England were impacted the same way by what probably represents early Anglo-Saxons. Returning to the continent, genetic data from 5th and 6th century Friesland reveals a surprising profile. The 3 individuals examined possessed predominantly Central European ancestry, albeit with significant Scandinavian-like admixture. This discovery is unexpected, as modern Northern Dutch and Northern German populations cluster tightly with contemporary Southern Scandinavians. These results raise compelling questions about the genetic makeup of Northern Central Europeans during the Iron Age. Given their geographic position between ancient Frisia and Scandinavia, it is possible their genetic profile served as a transition between the two. Under this hypothesis, Northern Central Europeans would have carried a higher proportion of Scandinavian ancestry, perhaps between 2/3 and 3/4, with the remaining component being Central European. Perhaps looking at the next few examples will shed some more light on this issue. The first relevant group to look at in this context consists of 2 5th century Bajuwari from modern-day Bavaria, which seem to be carrying more Scandinavian-related ancestry and less Central European ancestry than the contemporary samples from Friesland, but they also show an ancestry component which the study's authors labeled as Sarmatian and traced back to the steppes of southern Russia. A very similar mix can be found in some 6th century Lombards from Italy. Other Lombard samples showcase an almost entirely Central European background with a small degree of Hunnic ancestry. Because both the Bajuwari and the Lombards are generally thought to have developed largely from earlier Alp Germanic populations, which in turn developed from the aforementioned Jastorf culture, their genetic makeup is probably at least in part derived from these populations. The fact that they show a mix of Scandinavian-related and Central European ancestry would also fit their expected genetic makeup, based on the geographic location of the Jastorf and the Alp Germanic cultures. In that case, the Scandinavian-related admixture found in the Bajuwari and Lombard individuals might have originated in North Central Europe rather than in Scandinavia itself. Summing the previous results up, the authors state that they generally detected that Scandinavian-related ancestry in Western Europe seems to have been more closely related to Southern Scandinavians, whereas Scandinavian-related ancestry in Eastern Europe was more similar to Northern Scandinavians, which is a pattern that would be repeated later on during the Viking Age. The greater affinity Western Europeans show towards Southern Scandinavians makes sense if they actually derived this ancestry component not from Scandinavia directly, but rather from Northern Central Europe, which is geographically and probably also genetically more closely related to Southern Scandinavia than to Northern Scandinavia. That Northern Scandinavians in turn seem to have spread their ancestry across to Poland and beyond is particularly interesting in the context of the Goths who, according to at least one ancient source, originated in Scandinavia, although many scholars harbor doubts in regards to the reliability of this statement. This southward expansion of Scandinavian-like ancestry was eventually partially reversed during the Viking Age, when admixture related to Iron Age Central Europeans entered Jutland and southern Scandinavia, corresponding to modern-day Denmark and southern Sweden. Ancestry from Britain is also detected during this time, but to a lesser extent, and was mostly confined to northern Norway, whilst ancestry from Lithuania and Poland was present in individuals on the island of Gotland, confirming the results of previous studies. Naturally, Viking Age Scandinavians also left a substantial genetic footprint across Europe, though the nature of this impact varied by region. Populations in Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands appear to have been established by individuals carrying a mosaic of Iron Age Scandinavian, Central European, and British ancestry. In contrast, Viking Age individuals found in Ukraine and Russia lacked the Central European component. This divergence suggests a geographic split in points of origin. While the western colonies were settled by migrants from southern and western Scandinavia, the eastern expansion was driven by individuals hailing from central and northern Scandinavia. And this about covers it for this study. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below, and feel free to suggest other papers I could cover. I'd also love your feedback on my PCAs and my QPADM models. I know that the standard error in my Wielbark models is quite high, but that's the best I could do with the source populations I had access to, and I'm hoping to improve upon these results in the future, so all feedback is highly appreciated. As I've already mentioned, I have made videos about a fair few other studies of this kind already, all of which can be found in my playlist on the genetic history of Europe. Feel free to check it out if you're interested. But even if you don't, I still appreciate you watching until the very end, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one.